everybody. It is hard to believe that it is already June, and this is the Menorah Podcast. I want to welcome all of our listeners in today. This is the 19th episode of the Menorah Podcast Ministry, and I'm here today with Brother Alan Ott, our co-host.
Hey guys, how we doing today?
So guys, you guys know last week we did another pastor profile with Reverend J.K. Monroe. So if you haven't seen that one yet, make sure you go check that out and listen to that one. And so today we are actually going to start a multi-part series to give those that might not be aware of our church. Do want to give a little bit of background and context. Just a few weeks ago, we, for the first time ever, we did a Family Matters workshop. And this workshop was for parents specifically to learn more about how to raise children up in a godly home. And so we looked at that, and so we did that. And Alan, Alan, you were there running sound for us that night. We had over 45 parents that attended that event.
It was very well attended.
And so Pastor Chris did our meal that night, and we had childcare over here that was available. And so Alan and I got together, and we feel like that it would be really beneficial to be able to offer the content that was provided at the workshop through podcast form. So we're going to do series throughout the month of June is kind of what we're thinking. We don't know how many episodes right now, but we'll kind of let you know how many we end up doing. And so we just kind of want to talk a little bit about that. And so if you didn't get to attend the Family Matters workshop, you can listen to it here, but we also want to tell you that we're going to be offering another one at some point in the future. So what's going to happen is we're going to have the Family Matters workshop that we already had a few weeks ago. That's 1.0. And then for those that attended 1.0, we're going to do 2.0. So this podcast, we're not going to include everything that was included in the workshop, but we're going to give you something that you can listen to and you can send to people and say, hey, here's some of the content that I gained at this workshop. So, Alan, before we kind of dive into part one, which is today's episode, just tell me a little bit about what you got out of that workshop.
First of all, I'd like to say to all of our listeners now that are sitting back saying, well, I don't have any kids. I've raised my children. They're grown up. My deal is done. There's still probably some stuff in here that may be beneficial to you. Your kids are your kids from the time they're born till the time one of the two of you die.
That's right.
So, I thought this was very good. I don't remember anything like this before being offered by our church. I think it's a good idea. I think this is something that is in the forefront of today's society. Everybody wants their children to grow up and be respectful and independent. And I think this is a way to begin that biblically.
Yep, with a biblical foundation. And I think it is important to note, I've asked around and I've asked the association, different outlets. There's no other church in our association that offers anything like this, so we do want people to know, for our listeners, please send this particular podcast and the following podcasts that are part of this series to other people so they can hear about Family Matters, so that when we do it the next time, this is not just for our church. We want this to be for other churches because here at First Baptist, my personal belief is that we want to be kingdom-minded, not castle-minded. If there are people at Harmony, or there are people at Hillcrest, or there are people at Trinity, there's people at Lexington Baptist, you name it, if they're there, we want to invite them to come to this conference.
Exactly.
So that they can hear a little bit about it. And like I said, this, just because you listen to this podcast doesn't mean, I can go straight to Family Matters 2.0. No, we still want you to go to Family Matters 1.0 if you haven't been to that one. But this is just kind of get your feet wet. All right. Well, Alan, any other comments before we kind of dive in?
Nope.
All right. So obviously what I mentioned in the class first and foremost was I asked the question, why is someone without children teaching a class how to parent children? That's a wonderful question. And my answer to them was that my job as the under shepherd here at First Baptist Gaston, my job description, so to speak, is found in Ephesians 4:11 through 13, which says, "And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." So as your pastor, I want everybody to know that I do love them and that I was so proud that we had so many parents come, and that I'm not trying to tell people how to parent kids. I'm trying to show you the Bible's viewpoint on parenting and what that looks like and what it looks like to create and foster an environment at home that honors God, and where children are so saturated from the gospel because of the environment that the parents create. And so I want our listeners to know that I'm not telling people how to raise children. I'm trying to give you the tools in order to do that biblically. So we kind of opened up the workshop with, does First Baptist Gaston really care about young families? And so I was able to pull some statistics. If you look at our 2024 budget, $83,100 is allocated towards staff and ministries that directly impact our children and students. So to give some perspective, 15.4% of our annual budget goes towards our children's and youth ministries. That's a big deal. That's not always the case. To kind of give a little bit of perspective on that, in 2021, $27,000 was allocated for youth and children's ministries, and that was 7.4% of that year's budget. And so I think that's important to know that as we've had young families come into our church, we have expanded the amount of resources that go to that, because let's just be real, Al, there weren't as many young families at that time. So 7.4% of the budget at that time going towards next generation ministries doesn't seem like a lot, but for the amount that we had, it was okay.
Right.
So I think that's important to know that. And it's also important for our listeners to know how much our budget has changed overall. And all this is public information. We're not telling anything that, we don't hide this kind of information. And a lot of that has to do with our young families, and not just our young families coming, but our young families coming and tithing, our young families coming and getting involved and serving. So many of our young families don't just send their kids to church, they serve their kids in ministry. I'm thinking of several RA and GA leaders and children's worship leaders that, in other words, and I don't mean this offensively, it's not just older people teaching our kids. We got people of all ages. I think it takes that. I think it takes older, medium, younger, you name it. We need it.
Well, for someone like me who grew up in the church and my parents pretty much had me here every time, some of those leaders still stand out in my mind as having made an impact on my life. Terry Pound, Miss Lucy Mae Gant. Wendell Stabler was one of my first RA leaders. Dwayne Fallaw was one of my RA leaders. And I still remember some of the interactions I had with each of those.
Absolutely. And that's such a invaluable impact. You can't put a dollar sign on that.
No, you can't.
How special that is. So since 2021, Alan, we've had 144 people join our church. Out of the 144, 81 of those are under the age of 40. And so that is 56.3% of the 144 people that have joined our church in a 3-year span are under the age of 40. That is important. Especially,
it really is.
Considering where we were, the average age of the church, and considering where we are now, it is such a beautiful thing. So because of that, our church leadership has to say, we need to start equipping these parents. We need to really start realizing that, as I think Adam said during graduation Sunday this year, they're not just the future, they are the now. Mm-hmm. I mean, if that large percentage of our new members are under the age of 40, that's important. I give you those statistics so that you understand why something like this is so important for our church. Why does Family Matters even matter, right? Like, why does it even have significance? Why would we spend as much money as we did to get the food, to get the T-shirts, to print the books, all the different stuff that we did? Well, number one, we love Jesus, okay? And Jesus tells us that we should let the little children come to us. And so because we should be a church that fosters and develops children spiritually, we know that that's going to have to happen at home, because if you bring your kid, every time the doors are open at First Baptist Gaston, they're only going to be in church 3 hours a week. And if D groups, you get 4.
It's not a lot of time when you look at overall week.
Exactly. It's not at all. And so that means that parents have all this time. The school has more time than the church has.
Yep.
The school has 40 hours. We have 4. So don't expect your children to grow in the Lord if you just send them to RAs and send them to GAs and say, church, do your job. No, 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 no. The church comes alongside you as the parent, and you as the parent do the job of equipping the children.
Exactly.
That's a little bit of our intro to our Family Matters. We're going to open up our next episode. So what we're going to do, guys, is I covered 3 points. So you got some homework before next week's podcast, which is June 13th. And so we're still going to have a podcast next week. I'll be at the Southern Baptist Convention, so please pray for me as I represent our church with different things that are going on with that. But make sure you go ahead and read Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Over the next several episodes of the Menorah Podcast, we are going to dissect each one of those verses and how they relate to raising children in a godly home. So this is part 1. This is episode 19 of the Menorah Podcast. This is part 1 of the Family Matters mini-series inside of our Menorah Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you're looking forward to next week. We want to hear from you. Comment on social media. Do whatever you need to do. We want to hear about how this podcast impacts your life. So don't forget, Menorah Podcast, share the light, speak the light, send the light all across the airwaves of the internet. Have a good one. We'll see you next week for part 2.
Bye-bye, guys.